I'm delighted to welcome Donna Stevenson. Normally it's the other way around. Donna is normally introducing me and she gives me a wonderful introduction. But Donna and I have worked together for many years. Donna has just recently left the BDA as head of training, and Donna is behind writing and presenting most of the training courses that the BDA presented. So I'm really delighted to hand over to Donna, who's going to talk about thinking. So over to you, Donna.
Thanks, Katrina. Hi, everyone. Lovely to join you. Wow, what a person to follow, Amanda Kirby. No pressure on me. So, it's an interesting topic, this one. To a certain extent, I feel a little bit like an imposter today because I'm sandwiched in between Amanda and Gavin Reid and Neil Mackay. But that being said, I am extremely passionate about the importance, if we're serious about being dyslexia friendly, the importance of thinking about thinking, as I put it, or obviously executive functioning skills. And I can see some of you have been asking questions of Amanda a little earlier on. So what I've done is I've taken the liberty of popping in the chat some links to some books that actually I find over the years incredibly useful. So the links are here, but there's this book from Neil Mackay about removing dyslexia as a barrier to thinking, which is brilliant. And Katrina, I think I'm right in thinking that there's a discount in SEM books.
There is.
For the, yes.
I'll put the discount code on the slide later, and
Perfect.
I'll put it on the chat room, but
Yeah,
there's 15% discount on
great
SEM.
stuff.
Right.
Lovely. Because I've linked the books to the SEN. So this is the BDA's Dyslexia Friendly Schools Guide, because I know some of you were asking about study guides and so on. And actually, as I say, if we're serious about being dyslexia friendly, then we do have to address this issue of executive functioning skills, because it's got to be really at the very bedrock of everything that we do. Now, I don't want to repeat what Amanda's gone through, and this is only a very mini session, just really to pause for thought as we go into this afternoon sessions with Neil and Gavin as well. But what I hope to do, based on my experiences, Katrina said, I've been in the dyslexia world for quite a while now. Lucky me, because it's a fantastic community to serve. I've learned so much as well. Is that there's things that, get said about dyslexia a lot that are not true, or as it says here, myths, very lots of misunderstandings as well. And actually, I think we have to address those myths alongside anything we look at when we're looking at executive functioning issues as well. Okay, so let's get started. So based on what Amanda said, and obviously the other speakers will explore this today as well, what is it, what are we looking at when we're talking about thinking about thinking? And I don't want to repeat everything that Amanda's just very expertly gone through. But when I thought about, okay, what do I want to say in this session? To me, at the very crux are these issues, okay? It is this thing that's become a bit of a buzzword, metacognition. That's at the very heart, isn't it, of the skill for us all, whether we're neurodiverse or not, of thinking about thinking. How do I learn? How do I work? What works well for me? And so on and so forth. And really, as educators, that's always our aspiration for all our learners, I would suggest. And my background is in teaching as well, many years before I joined the BDA. And what we really want to aspire to for all our learners is this phrase, the reflective learner. But what I also wanted to do, everyone, for this session was not just make it about learners. I wanted to also talk about, people in the workplace or wherever we may be, because actually these skills of metacognition, wherever we may be in our lives, whether it is a young child in school, and some of you have been asking about primary age children, or whether you're an adult, well on your way into your career and you're looking to get a promotion or whatever it might be, we need to know ourselves as best as we can. And it's this idea about being this reflective learner, and it's figuring out, okay, what works best for me in different situations. Now, of course, that will not happen automatically. And for those of you who are taking individuals, young and old, on a learning journey, I think that's part of our role as an effective supporter, teacher, whatever we might be, colleague, whatever situation that we're in. Okay, it's encouraging that. And a lot of people will say, okay, well, how do I do that? And some of the things we're going to look at today in my session, I'm going to hint at, and Amanda's been talking about that stuff as well. Of course she has, and Neil will a little bit later on too. But I'm a firm believer now in a phrase that we hear a lot these days, is you cannot be what you cannot see. So really we have to be the role models first. Again, whilst if we're working with young children, or if it is in a situation with colleagues at work or students in college or wherever it may be, folks need to see us modeling these skills in order to develop themselves as well. So that comes back to somebody had said in the chat, you know, where do we start? What can we do? We start with ourselves really as role models. It's really important. And then we need to figure out and encourage these kind of reflective questions. Okay. It's, you know, what do I find tough? What do I hate? Can I figure out why I don't like things? If I'm talking about things being boring or, you know, whatever the phrase may be, why is it boring? Why is it really tough for us? It's this type of dialogue we need to encourage. Similarly, why do you love something? Why are you so good at that? Why do you really enjoy it? And really being a bit of a detective and figuring out why you might hate things and why you might love things so much as well. And I think when we take somebody on that journey, young or old, we start to see patterns emerging about why do you really hate these things? Why do you not like to be in situations like this? Why do you feel stressed out? Why do you really love that? Why is that easy for you? And we start to see patterns. Now, again, we mustn't kind of expect the individual themselves to spot those patterns. That's where sometimes we will come in, isn't it? Having this type of dialogue with individuals as well. Amanda was talking about do it profiler. And again, I think if we're serious about encouraging metacognition, looking at executive functioning skills as well, in a broader sense, we really need to think about identification. Because for some people, and again, this is young and older learners and individuals in work, wherever we may be in life, it's important that we know ourselves, and identification and assessment can be a key part of that journey. And actually, Katrina's team at Positive Dyslexia have got another masterclass on the 31st of March about screening, assessment and identification of dyslexia. Because yes, it's got to be part of the journey for some individuals, it really does. And on the back of that, what we often find then is that organisations create what we call now a learning passport as well. And one of the links I've put on one of my slides today is a great free screener that's on the British Dyslexia Association website, links to it, where you can start to go through that with individuals, again, children and post-16s, to figure out, you know, okay, what am I good at? Where do I struggle? And start to create this passport. It's all part of this self-knowledge and self-understanding, isn't it? And also my final bullet point here, which I'm really passionate about, is encouraging learning intelligence as well. So it's very much attached to this reflective learner idea. We talk a lot these days, don't we, about emotional intelligence, really understanding where we're at in terms of our emotions and our well-being. I think it's really important as well if we encourage learning intelligence. So it's this idea of, okay, you know, what do I find difficult? Why might that be? What do I find easy? What do I really enjoy? Why is that? So it is part of this metacognitive journey that we want to encourage, this thinking about thinking. My session is laced with lots of quotes from real people in the real world. And I think it's always useful when we think about these topics if we hear other people's voices beyond somebody like me. So this is a brilliant quote from an individual called Sam. And they say, helping my son figure out how he learned, including his superpowers, so it's not always about challenges, really made a big difference to his education. Such a light bulb moment to realise that his learning patterns, and this is the bit I love, his learning patterns were the same whether he was in maths, English or science. Okay, so it's this idea that we can transcend the curriculum and look at this overarching learning pattern. And great to read somebody like Sam saying that, yeah, that was a real light bulb moment for them, because then they start to think, right, okay, how can we work with our son and make sure that whether he's in maths, English or science, we are working with him in the ways that he likes to learn. And again, a reason why I wanted to share this is because something else I'm super passionate about is the idea of dyslexia, superpowers or talents and gifts, however you want to phrase it. Because I would argue that if we tap in to those superpowers, that gives us a bit of a roadmap for how we would work with Sam's son. because figuring out what Sam Sud is good at will help us to tap into those superpowers as we take him through his maths, English, science, whatever it may be. Now, this is talking about a child, but actually it's a very similar pattern to when we're with adults as well, whether they're studying or whether they're in the world of work as well. It's tapping into those superpowers, which will help them to figure out a good path for them. This is a quote we've probably all seen a lot of. It's, of course, the Rose Review. I put it in, it says here, back to basics. For some of you, you know, this session will be hopefully a useful one because it really is back to basics in the sense of, okay, what is dyslexia then? There's lots of definitions out there. This is by Sir Jim Rose, and it talks about, you know, what dyslexia is. Now, part of it is very much part of, I think, what a lot of our understanding is around dyslexia, of course. It's around literacy, isn't it? But also what Sir Jim flagged to us, which is really important, is the idea of, he talks about verbal memory and verbal processing as well. So it's this memory and processing, which all alludes to the fact of executive functioning. And I think often, certainly in the work that I did for many years at the British Dyslexia Association, focusing on adults towards the latter part of my time there, they were the parts that was often getting forgotten about when colleagues were talking about their dyslexia. There was a hyper focus on literacy and a non-appreciation, a lack of understanding that actually executive functioning is a massive part of somebody's experience, often to do with dyslexia as well. And I suppose this is a good place then to talk about these myths that often surround dyslexia. I mean, we've all probably got myths and ideas that we've heard over the years, or maybe that we ourselves have realised weren't quite true. And do share in the chat, I'll keep an eye if any of them come through. But rather than me, I didn't want this part of the session to be me just sharing with you things that I've heard over the years. Having said that, all of these resonate with me because I've heard them in lots of different ways over the years. But I wanted to base it on research. So this is from the Lexicon Project from Bangor University, around the myths that they spotted when they were having a look at the area of dyslexia. And some of these will jump out of us more than others, of course, but it's interesting to have a look. We've got the first one, that dyslexia in some way is a result of laziness or low intelligence. There is often this perception around dyslexia that it's just a case of working that little bit harder, and then, you know, you can kind of break out of those boundaries in some way. And again, not only is that incredibly insulting and very negative, actually, as we see here, it is not true. Yes, it's about working in different ways, in what we call dyslexia-friendly ways. And very much today at the heart of what all the speakers will say, isn't it, is around dyslexia-friendly. And actually, happily, I know Amanda was talking about neurodiverse-friendly. Often, you know, what is dyslexia-friendly is also neurodiverse-friendly as well. So then we've got here the result of poor teaching as well. And I can see that one of our listeners has said, you've had someone blame parents for not reading enough with their student. So yes, Sarah, it's this idea that if only something could have been done in the younger age group, then yes, we could have had an idea that maybe dyslexia wouldn't have happened to those individuals. And again, not only is that a great way to make parents feel guilty, and we don't need excuses enough to feel guilty, do we? But it's this misconception that, oh, something's happened early on and somebody's gone on and developed dyslexia in that way. We know that dyslexia is genetic and neurological, so most people who've got dyslexia have been born with it, and happily now are very proud of the fact that they've got dyslexia, and that comes back to that superpowers idea as well. So this ties in with what Sarah said, you know, an idea that it's poor teaching in some way, whether it's from parents in the early years, or, you know, a child's had some poor teachers, the bad luck of having poor teachers along the way. We've then got areas, and this one's a bit contentious really. We've got this idea that it's about vision and about overlays. I'll jump around a little bit on these bullet points if that's okay. So we've got a disorder of vision, but we've also got this one a little bit lower down, dyslexia is cured with coloured lenses as well. Now, yes, this is an area that we're very aware of, that's affiliated and connected with in some way to dyslexia, and everybody's going to be unique. In in fact, I've got a quote in a minute around somebody talking about overlays and coloured paper and so on. Yes, it's really useful to have those things in place, but we mustn't fall into this myth that that's what dyslexia is. And I always remember many years ago, I went into a school and they knew I'd come from the BDA, and somebody said to me, "Oh, it's okay, Donna, we're dyslexia friendly here. Look, we've got the cream paper." And as lovely as that was, I didn't like to say that, yeah, actually, it's way more than that. So we knew that we had a fair bit of work to do with them. But again, do share your stories in the chat. It's lovely to hear your thoughts on that. So yes, we know that dyslexia and how we look at words and colours and so on can be interlinked. Sometimes it's part of dyslexia, sometimes it's a co-occurring difference. But for sure, it is not going to be, the answer to everything. And it's not also going to be for everybody's experience as well. Somebody talking about dyslexia and we're getting the overlays out. Yes, Katrina, you've had schools say they've got the coloured overlays. So this is this idea that that's all it is. Okay, but having said that, we don't want to diminish fonts and how we present information. My information today is dyslexia friendly. It is important, but it is not the only part of the journey. Okay, we've also got this one, which is an interesting one. Especially we have to be careful, I think, when we talk about superpowers, that everyone with dyslexia is highly creative. Okay, no, not everybody is. That being said, I am a firm believer, though, that everybody has their own gifts and talents. And yes, for sure, for some individuals with dyslexia, it is creativity. But you know what? It's not necessarily going to be that you're going to be the next Picasso or whatever. He had dyslexia. But it could be that you're creative in, how you are with people. Creativity manifests itself in many different ways. How you present yourself, how you decorate your home, how you dress, whatever it is. Creativity is lots of different ways. I always loved the quote from Einstein. He said, creativity is a state of mind. And actually, maybe I'm going to contradict this myth a little bit, because all the people I've met with dyslexia over the years, and it's been many, if we think about creativity as a state of mind, I'd argue that most of them are quite creative, actually. I think sometimes we fall into the trap when we think about creativity of thinking about the arts. And if we're just thinking about it in that sense, then yes, not everybody with dyslexia is going to be fabulous at the arts. Okay, so it's an interesting one. But I think quite a lot of them are creative in many different ways. The next one is a really interesting one, and it's this idea that it's dyslexia is poor reading and spelling. Now, as I said to you, in my experience over the years, I've been a lot of the time working as a consultant and a trainer in the world of work and with older individuals. And actually, it's that myth that is the real challenging one, this idea that it's all about reading and spelling. That being said, I've also witnessed teachers and educators in many different with age groups and in many different kind of areas of study, whether it's college or at primary or even early years in the foundation stages, they themselves are talking about dyslexia in terms of literacy. And yes, it's really, really important that we address dyslexia in that way, because yes, for sure, it will impact on a lot of individuals in those ways. But we have to know that it transcends literacy as well for a lot of individuals. And for some individuals, it has no impact on their literacy. And we mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that that's all dyslexia is. Okay, so it's a real balancing act on that one, not to diminish the impact of literacy. It is hugely impactful when people have challenges in that way. But we must also realise that there's other parts of the dyslexia journey as well. And what we mustn't presume that if the literacy is okay, then, we don't need to do anything. All is fine. We still need to be on that journey with individuals, young and old. And in fact, that's why I get so excited about the executive functioning topic, because to me, this transcends everything. This is at the bedrock of looking at literacy or whatever it might be. Think about what Sam had said in that quote. There's a learning pattern, whether it is in English, maths, wherever it may be. Okay. And then we've talked about the overlays, but the last one there, it says that it's a disadvantage for life. Okay. So it's firstly that word disadvantage. I don't like that word. But also it's this idea that it's always going to be static in some way. Yes, it's going to be present, but we change and we evolve, and our dyslexia evolves with us as well. As we get, more understanding of our dyslexia, we have our own strategies in place and so on. So it is evolving as well. And I think it's important that we understand that. But I also want to just unpick again, because it's completely opposite of where I am, is this idea that dyslexia is all about disadvantages and challenges and so on. We've really got to understand that there's so many superpowers that come with it as well. So this is Charlie, and they say, because my reading, writing, and spelling are okay, I've had some people say to me, "You don't look dyslexic." And I often think, what should dyslexia look like? And this is a really interesting one. And these are real quotes. And when I had a chat with Charlie, they'd said to me that so this is an adult, would say, so colleagues would say, "You've got dyslexia, you don't look like you've got dyslexia." And as Charlie said, depending on what mood they were in, would say, "Well, what does that look like?" And it's this again, misconceptions really about what dyslexia is, what should it look like? And, tying it back into our subject matter today, it's really important that we transcend that as we look at these issues about thinking and metacognition. This is another interesting one. Nadine, I can't tell you the number of times when I've mentioned my dyslexia, coloured overlays or coloured papers being mentioned, and it makes absolutely no difference to me. So this is an interesting one. Nadine is one of the people where it doesn't matter how things look for her. These kinds of misconceptions can be dangerous, and I think diminishes what it means to live with dyslexia. And actually, I agree with Nadine. As I said earlier, I think it's about the balance, isn't it? Yes, we know that these things can be useful, but it's not the be all and end all of what it means, as Nadine says, to live with dyslexia. So, what are the impact of executive functioning challenges? Bearing in mind what Nadine and Charlie are saying, that their dyslexia is not going to be supported by a lot of literacy support, or as Nadine says, getting the coloured overlays out. They need more from us than that. And these are some of the challenges that certainly I've heard about a lot, whether I've been in schools, whether I've been in workplaces, colleges, wherever. It's these types of issues that when the professionals involved will reach back to us and say, "Look, we've got the overlays, we've got some assistive technology, but actually there's recurring challenges that are not going away for our colleague or for our student. Can you help us?" And again, it comes back to being a little bit like that detective as well. And it's this idea of this kind of executive functioning challenges, which is about processing and working memory and being able to retrieve information under pressure and so on. A word that we talked about a lot at BDA certainly is this difficulty sometimes in acquiring automaticity. That's what we aspire to, isn't it, for certain tasks? Amanda was talking about that earlier, about being automatic with things that we don't think about. And what we want for our learners, young and old, is that there's certain things that they are now, automatic with, so that they can get on and learn at the higher level as well. Okay, I won't focus too much on this slide because I know Amanda's talked about it earlier, but you will have these slides to have a look at. But often when schools and colleges and organisations reach out to us over the years and say, "Look, it's still not working for all our individuals," it tends to be because they haven't actually addressed, the executive functioning challenges that are underneath all of these issues. Here's another quote from Paul. "Love, love, love the idea of dyslexia superpowers. I often think that if me and my kids can tap into our superpowers, we can get through pretty much any situation, whatever it is. Me going for promotion at work or my twins studying for their GCSEs." Okay, so it's this idea again that actually some of the clues on what we can do for ourselves and our kids and our students, whoever it may be, the clues lie in the things that we're actually good at. And it comes back to that, having that understanding of ourselves. So again, we don't have a great deal of time in this mini session, but I'm just going to go through some of these superpowers because I think, the clues are here in terms of how we work. And hopefully, if we've got this straight in our heads, then as we listen to Neil and Gavin this afternoon, it will build on that as we go. Okay, so I'm going to cherry pick some of these, if that's okay with everyone, just to hint across the executive functioning side. So of course, we've got determination there, which is brilliant and really come into its own during COVID, isn't it? When we didn't want to give up and we kept on keeping on. We had to, really. And so having determination is fantastic. And actually what it means in our young learners and our adults is they do have this dogged determination to go. It's our job to inspire them and make sure they get the support they need as well. But one that I really want to highlight is this idea of atypical problem solving. Okay, so it's these types of skills that not everybody with dyslexia will have, but quite a few folks, if they're lucky enough to have this one, it's these skills that we need to tap into as we try to encourage some of this metacognitive good practice, these executive functioning skills. Okay, it's also the creativity side as well. So yes, as we said, it's not necessarily always going to be the arts, but it can be this creative way of looking at things that we can certainly tap into as we inspire our learners along the way. This next one's an interesting one, and it's good procrastination. And actually, for us, we often see procrastination as a very negative thing, don't we? It's somebody who may be taking way too long to do what should be something very quick. But actually, if we've turned that on the head here and we talk about good procrastination, and the reason I think this one's important when we think about thinking is that it's this next word, which I absolutely love. It's incubating the best solutions. Okay, so it's encouraging our learners, and especially if they've got this superpower, to start to think about ideas and solutions and whatever it might be, whether you're in a literacy class, trying to solve a problem at work, whatever it might be, it's giving them time to be able to incubate in those ways. Okay, and that's tapping into something that people will often enjoy doing, will need to do, and actually if we give them that little bit of time, will come back to us with fantastic ideas as well. So it's really getting creative with, if we're in a school setting, how we deliver our curriculum. Okay, and what I've included in this session is a video of somebody called Dr. Susie Nyman, who I think is an absolute genius at delivering sessions in these ways, curriculum sessions with learners. She's brilliant. She's a scientist, but you know what she does can be replicated in lots of different subject areas. So we'll be playing that in a few minutes because it's important that I highlight to you in the real world how these things look. Okay, I suppose the other idea I just want to point out to you before we move on, because as I say, I don't want to read out all of these, is exceptional in the right niche. So again, it's our job to encourage our learners or our colleagues to find where that niche is. Okay, and then hopefully they can flourish and thrive. Here's Rahima sharing their thoughts. Delivering dyslexia-friendly teaching and ways to work with people should be a matter of standard now. It's such a no-brainer. I love that phrase. It's such a no-brainer in terms of being serious about getting the best out of us all, whether we have dyslexia or not. And this is a really interesting part now, what Rahima shares. I think the pandemic has meant that a lot of us who don't have dyslexia have weaker memories, processing skills, and organisational skills. The experience of COVID has definitely impacted on us all. And I guess what Rahima says here, and why I wanted to share it, because I actually agree with this. I think even if for those of us who don't have dyslexia, I think what we've just been living through and continue to do so has in fact impacted on a lot of us in terms of our memory, our processing, our organisational skills as well. And that's why, as Rahima says earlier in her quote, it's a no-brainer to start to think about how we encourage these skills, really, because a lot of us will experience them whether we have dyslexia or not. So what are we looking at then in terms of, I've used this phrase a lot today, dyslexia unfriendly teaching and working. So I've used the opposite. I've talked about dyslexia friendly, haven't I? And that's a phrase that Neil Mackay termed. So it's great that he's on this afternoon. But actually, ironically, to start to think about what's dyslexia unfriendly, whether we're talking about in the school, a college, wherever, or the world of work, helps us sometimes, ironically, to figure out, okay, so if this is dyslexia unfriendly, what does it mean then to be dyslexia friendly? And Rahima was talking about that earlier, saying it was a no-brainer. So what is it then that's unfriendly practice? Things that we really need to avoid if that we are serious about being dyslexia friendly. So what's here? Now, this information is based on expertise from myself and others, but also feedback from children and adults, and we've put them in quite a useful list here as well. So I am going to read all these out, so just bear with me, but I'll do it as quickly as I can. We've got ideas of being too busy, noisy, and frantic. Okay, so that's something that we know right from the off is really dyslexia unfriendly, whether we're looking at in education or in the world of work. It's also lack of time. And it says here destructive, and you might think, what's destructive time? It means when we use time in its almost worst concept, if you like, where we're saying, 5 minutes to go, or you've got to get this in, and this is a fixed deadline. So it's that type of time, or where it's very, very kind of oppressive, I'm going to use the word. And that's a phrase I've heard a lot over the years, people saying that the idea that I don't have a lot of time, it weighs down on me. So it's this idea then that we're adding pressure on individuals that we really need to avoid if we're serious about being dyslexia friendly and people friendly, actually. Okay. We also know that a lack of structure and planning and so on can really be detrimental to those with dyslexia. And what we really need to be aspiring to create is a bit of a roadmap through, whether we're at a strategic level in work or whether we're working with our kids in a literacy session and we're giving them, a bit of a roadmap of what's going to happen today as we travel through looking at a book or whatever it might be. So it's this idea that we're giving this scaffolding and breaking things down into bite-sized chunks. These are the very bedrocks of what it means to be dyslexia friendly, but also therefore, because you kind of can't be both one without the other, be encouraging executive functioning skills. Okay. We've also got to make sure that we give time to decompress as well. Now, I think, that's not only about decompression and making sure that you kind of have time to process, it comes back to if we're serious about those superpowers as well. Time to do this thing called good procrastination too. Okay. We've also got this idea of an over-reliance on one working style or teaching style. Again, at the very heart of being dyslexia friendly, it's that we work in creative ways, multi-sensory ways as well. And you'll see that in the video with Dr. Susie Nyman as well. Lack of feedback. So again, this comes back to this idea of lack of structure and overload in that structure and expectation. So again, it's this idea we really need to be taking folks, young and old, on a journey of these bite-sized chunks. And the one to me, which is really important, is this final bullet point. It's the negative atmosphere. And again, whether that's in school or in the world of work, it's this idea that there's an attitude and culture that is not dyslexia friendly. Okay, when we spoke over the years to those with dyslexia, young and old, and said to them, what's a real struggle for you, and they will start to talk about attitude and culture. Now, they won't always use that phrase, but when you dig deeper about feeling embarrassed or people ridiculing or people not listening or not delivering information in ways that they like to receive it and so on, at the very heart of that comes to attitude and culture. And for me, for all the many years now I've been in the world of dyslexia, that's the one I'm actually really passionate about. That's why I love Superpowers so much, because to me, starting to talk about gifts and talents as well really sets the tone about being positive about dyslexia. And that's great that Katrina's company is called Positive Dyslexia as well. I know she feels the same way. So very quickly, everyone, what's this roadmap then? And as I say, don't worry, you'll have these slides. Multisensory. So that's how we use information, how we present it, something to look at, listen to, do, using our, all our senses as much as we can. It's not always possible to do it all the time, but, we need to endeavour to try and make it so as much as we can. For a lot of learners and, folks in the world of work, COVID's been a real challenge for many reasons, but one of them is because everything suddenly became very 2D, didn't it? Two-dimensional, looking at a screen. And that very interactive way of being in school or being in work with colleagues and so on, it really was taken away from us for quite some time. And it's a tricky ask sometimes to make sessions like this one multi-sensory, but hopefully by talking, and we've got Darius doing a mind map, it makes it more active. But yes, we need to make sure that's at the very bedrock of what we do. And I'm sure Neil will talk about that a little bit later on. Attitudes and culture, I've already said. I'm not ashamed to say that's the one I'm absolutely passionate about. And I think it's the language of metacognition, encouraging that in our culture as well, in our learning culture, our work culture, from a very young age, actually, encouraging kids to be really reflective. What did you like? What didn't you like? Why? It's all these types of things. Scaffolding. So that really is a great way to work with individuals with dyslexia, where the scaffolder, whether a teacher or a colleague, time. You know, that's the one thing we don't have a lot of, but it's the one thing that often is just the very thing that's needed, that bit of extra time as well. Again, then we've got the ideas like reviewing of tasks. So again, it comes back to this language of metacognition, doesn't it? The language of thinking. An assessment, do we need to have an assessment? We might not for everybody, but for some, that might be the logical next step. This one is also important to me near the bottom. It's regular check-ins to keep it real. Again, in the world of work and often with older learners, I think we're very good at it in with our children happily, but maybe as we get older and we're in college and so on, or then, you know, ultimately we're working, we forget to check in. We give people the goodies and the adjustments at the beginning of the journey, and then we leave them to it. And as we said earlier, people change, situations change, COVID's happened, things have changed. We need to check that things are still working. And part of regular check-ins is also being honest and keeping it real too. Okay. And then we've got ideas of working together, which again, I love. Champions, dyslexia champions, champion allies. Even in our children, we can encourage that. You would be surprised at how powerful it is when a teacher speaks out about being dyslexic or neurodiverse. Great role model. Remember what we said, you can't be what you can't see. Fantastic. We know it makes a difference. So if you're an educator listening and you feel confident enough, do step up and inspire. But also for colleagues as well. And then we've got, you know, kids or colleagues working together in buddies and so on. So it's all these different ways that we know really helps with metacognition and memory and organisation and so on. Now we come to the video of a woman who I think is a genius, and she is going to show us what this stuff means that I've just been going on about whistle stop speed, what this means in the real world. Okay, so this is dyslexia friendly teaching, and what we're saying here, folks, is that actually why it's dyslexia friendly teaching is because at its heart it is encouraging executive functioning skills and reinforcing them as well. Okay, so I know I've got Aaron in the background to help me with the tech if needed, but I'm just gonna press a few buttons. And Aaron, do let me know if the sound isn't on. I think it should be. I've pressed the button. Hopefully everyone can hear this okay. Off we go. Of fantastic modelling there from Susie, isn't it? Susie makes me want to study science, and I hate science. She's a brilliant teacher, and I think for her students, that's just how she's seen, a brilliant teacher. Part of the reason she's so brilliant is because how she's teaching everything in that fantastic way suits all learners. Kathy, you've just said amazing teacher. She is, and it's no coincidence that she's happens to be a very dyslexia friendly teacher, because this is it. When we work or study or learn in these ways, it's a better experience. I loved what she said about the boy who went and said, can we do it again? I don't get it. And that's what we need to encourage, isn't it? That youngster was reflective enough to think, actually, I don't get it. I need to go back to Susie and for her to take me through. And she said she'd done it 5 times. But that video is on BDA YouTube channel if you want to look at it again. There's some links that I've got on my final slide, which I'm getting to in a moment. So you can have a look. There's lots of great videos there, because actually I think it probably takes a couple of watches to really see what she's doing. There's a lot in there. You know, she starts by setting the scene. She learns by analogy. She's linking, you know, she talked about bicuspid and tricuspid, bi and tri from Sainsbury's. So she links things, what she thinks her students will know and so on. So there's lots there about what she does as a matter of standard that actually fits really well when we're looking at this issue of executive functioning, because that's at the very heart of being what we call dyslexia friendly, but also a great way to learn. You know, not all students that she works with got dyslexia, of course they're not, but they just really enjoy having those lessons with her. So to summarise then, everybody, in this very quick session, these were my top 5 when I thought, right, what can I say at the end here to you all? I think, yes, we need to make sure one step at a time, and that's what we saw Susie doing, wasn't it? Wherever possible, you know, we do need to make things multisensory. So as it says here, give a visual or verbal representation of things, of verbal and written information. So and then beyond, you know, we saw Susie there with using balloons to show how the human body works, or that thing she did on the floor. I think interesting as well, being a primary school teacher myself many years ago, there's often an idea that we can only do that stuff in the early years or primary sector. But actually, we saw Susie there. She works in a college with older learners, and we can still do that stuff with our older learners. Often when we work with tutors and so on, and Key Stage 3 and 4 colleagues, they'll say, "Oh, I can't do that in my class, you know, it's really childish." But actually it isn't. If we look at how Susie did that stuff, it was really sophisticated, and you know, they all really loved it. So we've also then, back to number 3 here, we've got this idea of preview and review. So it's almost this, you know, preparation for going through a session. And I often say it's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's this, you know, this is coming next. We've just done that. Now we're going to do this. So this is where we act as the scaffolder in that way. Again, whether we're in school or whether we're, you know, guiding through colleagues through a meeting, you know, we've just spoke about that. Now we're going on to this next one, and so on and so forth. Okay. Number 4 is something that I don't always practice what I preach. It's slowing down. So I talk 10 to the dozen because I'm a Scouser. But it's a really conscious idea of making sure that we slow down. Okay. And make sure that we break up information. So it's those bite-sized chunks, give our learners or our colleagues or whatever these little mini rest points, you know, so they can process and then move on, and so on. So it's these ideas as well. And this one, again, I like this one, number 5. It's assume nothing, isn't it? It might make perfect sense to us why, you know, this week we're looking at telling the time, and last week we looked at fractions. It kind of makes sense in some ways because of half and quarter and so on. So yeah, the curriculum, hopefully most of the time, is quite logical. But to our learners who think, well, last week we did fractions, why are we looking at time now? We need to make those connections and not assume that just because it makes perfect sense to us, that everybody else is going to feel the same way, whether it is about learning to tell the time or whether it's something, you know, you're taking colleagues on a journey to look at how you're going to change your, you know, business plan or whatever. You need to think about how we're going to make it very clear and scaffold through, and we're not just assuming that everybody understands where we're kind of on in that way. Okay, so with one eye on the time, we'll stop there. As I say, when you get these slides, you will see that there's resources here for you to have a look at. The link to the neurodiversity page is on BDA website, which is perfect free resource to use for a learning passport, BDA webinars and BDA YouTube channel as well. We've also got fantastic videos on Helen Arkell. And as Katrina said, I think in the chat, Susie Nyman has done some fantastic work with Ochre Books as well. So she is a wonderful lady, and we're hoping to have her on a masterclass in the not too distant future as well. So I can see Katrina's back, so I'm going to go quiet and hand over, and we'll see if we've got any questions. I'll have a look in the chat as well.
Well, I think we both speak very quickly, but 10 to the dozen, because we're both so passionate about what we speak about. But thank you so much, Donna, for putting across that passion and giving a really interesting session there. It's always wonderful working with you and training with you. So we're going to stop for a lunch break now. I don't see any current questions on the chat box, but if anyone thinks of anything, Susie Nyman, Kathy, it's Dr. Susie Nyman. She works at Farnborough Sixth Form College. Fantastic.
And if you're coming to Dyslexia Show, you can see her in room 5 on day 1 at 3 p.m. So you can see her actually in the flesh with her box of tricks, and she does bring a suitcase. Her title for her talk is 2020 Vision for Dyslexic Students for a Mutual Sensory Toolkit.
Fantastic. Excellent.
So, Katrina, sorry to interrupt. There was a question about reading and spelling. If we've got a second or two, just to, could you please elaborate the myth? Dyslexia is poor reading and spelling. So yeah, I think it's multi-layered, Afrosia. We've got this idea that that's all dyslexia is, full stop. And obviously for some folks, literacy and reading and spelling and writing is a real challenge in a variety of different ways. So we've got this idea that that is all dyslexia is, which is a myth. But we've also got this idea that if you don't have those challenges, then you don't have dyslexia. And I think somebody had said a bit later on that they met with a teacher or something and they said, oh, this child hasn't got dyslexia because they haven't got literacy challenges. So it's this idea that we only ever associate dyslexia with literacy. And I've worked with many adults, professionals who will say, I did have literacy issues as a child, you know, I've had great teaching or I've found my own strategies or whatever it is, and now I don't have those challenges anymore, but actually I've got memory, process and organisational challenges. But my colleagues, my boss is saying to me, I haven't got dyslexia anymore. I do. It manifests in these ways. So that's what we meant there, Afrasia. It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's not to diminish literacy, but we must look beyond that. And that's what today's all about. So big thanks to Katrina for putting this day on, because this is the elephant in the room, really, I think, with dyslexia, executive functioning skills.
Definitely, and lovely comment from Ian on the chat room as well. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, thank you, Ian. This is a very emotional, emotive subject, isn't it? And you know, British Dyslexia Association has a helpline if you want to reach out to get further support and advice. But Katrina is also, I know, very kind, always on the other end of an email, aren't you, Katrina, at Positive Dyslexia? So yeah.
And I'm also trustee of the adult.
Oh yes, yes.
As well, and they have their own helpline and give advice as well. So there are other people on today from other local
oh yes, there is
associations. So do look up your local dyslexia association if you want to.
Yeah, perfect.